you ever thought you were driving alone at night? After hearing these 3 stories, you might not be so sure anymore. In today's video, you'll embark on 3 chilling journeys. A mysterious mechanic standing in the middle of Route 66, firing at a truck without saying a word. A car with a stranger already hiding inside, and they don't leave, even after the ride is over. And a scream in the woods, not calling for help, but luring you in. No jump scares, no blood, just silence, thick as the darkness, and something watching you from the rearview mirror. By the end of this video, you'll understand why all 3 drivers made the same choice. They never drive alone at night again. What about you? If you enjoy stories like these, don't forget, subscribe so you won't miss the next dark night. Like this video if you've ever found yourself in a spine-tingling moment like these. Comment with the scariest experience you've ever had. Who knows, it might appear in the next video. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and begin. Tonight's drive is longer than you think. James wasn't the superstitious type. He believed in real things: cracked dashboards, frayed seatbelts, rough roads, and delivery deadlines. He'd been driving across the U.S. for nearly 16 years and had survived long enough to know that the only things that could kill him weren't ghosts or demons. It was a cold cup of coffee or dozing off at 3 a.m. But that night smelled different. He was on the loneliest stretch of Route 66, heading toward Santa Monica. Alone, in pitch darkness, the headlights of James's semi, which had been dim for 3 weeks, barely lit up a faint yellow strip ahead, as if the darkness was slowly devouring everything in front of him. He hadn't fixed the lights, simply because there hadn't been time, and because, well, no one really expects anything bad to happen out here in the middle of nowhere, where there's nothing but sand and old bones. There was no moon in the sky, no stars, nothing at all, as if even God couldn't be bothered to look this way. He turned on the radio, just static, switched the channel, still just white noise, empty sound, echoing like it came from a long deserted hallway. He cursed under his breath, shook his head, then reached for a can of energy drink, now cold, took a sip, and tasted nothing but metal. The road stretched endlessly. Now and then, James passed a toppled utility pole, rusted steel frames, or worn-out road signs with letters nearly erased. Route 66 had once been the American dream. Now it was the gatekeeper of things long forgotten. He wasn't afraid of the night, but tonight, something made him shiver. Not from cold, but from how the air seemed to grow heavier with every minute. A silence that wasn't peaceful, but watching. Just a few more hours, James muttered, as if to soothe himself. But deep in his eyes, the darkness didn't recede. It waited, and up ahead was something he had never prepared for. James saw it from afar, a large, silent shape lying across the lane as if someone had abandoned a steel shark in the middle of a desert ocean. At first, he thought it was a pile of junk or a roadkill carcass, but the closer he got, the more he saw a faint glimmer of silver reflecting back from his dim headlights. A Cadillac. Silver. Old. He slammed on the brakes. The screech tore through the still night like metal, screaming from being yanked out of sleep. The Cadillac was parked dead center in the road, as if someone had deliberately placed it there to block his way. No blinkers, no hazard lights. Just the passenger door, wide open like a mouth, gaping, waiting for someone to step inside. The air suddenly felt heavier, stifling. He turned off the radio, not out of fear, but because something needed to be heard. James shifted into reverse, easing the truck toward the roadside, hands gripping the steering wheel out of sheer instinct. He wasn't one to panic easily, but an old Cadillac in the middle of Route 66 at nearly 3 a.m.? That wasn't an accident. That was an invitation. He stepped out, bringing a small flashlight from the cab. The yellowed beam quivered like his hand. His boots tapped softly against the warm asphalt. Route 66 still held the heat of the day, like the belly of a living thing, faintly simmering. He approached the Cadillac. No sound, no movement, just silence, thick and viscous, like molten tar. James tilted his head, leaned in, and shone his flashlight inside the car. No one. Empty seats, no bags, no jacket, no signs anyone had just been there. But the car still held a scent, a mix of motor oil, stale cigarettes, and something else. Sweet, metallic. James felt a surge of dread rise in his chest like a rush of blood. This wasn't right. This didn't feel like a car left behind because it broke down. It felt like someone had just left. Silently. He pointed the flashlight toward the back, walked to the trunk. The handle was stiff, almost locked. He tried to pull. Nothing. No key. James squinted, turned back to the driver's side, and saw the key still in the ignition, though the engine was off. His rational mind told him, "This is your chance to leave. No one's forcing you to touch this." But instinct, the same instinct that got him through nights of black ice and desert storms, whispered, "You need to know." He climbed into the back seat, looking for the latch to fold it down and access the trunk from the inside. The flashlight swayed, revealing something in the darkness behind the leather wall. 2 black trash bags, tightly packed, sealed with duct tape. A rope was tied in a knot around the trunk latch from the inside, as if someone was trying to keep it closed. James held his breath, and then, bang! A gunshot tore through the night like thunder exploding just behind his neck. James jolted up and smacked his head on the roof of the car. His flashlight slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor beneath the seats. In that instant, all he could hear was the pounding of his heart, like hammers on a drum, and the metallic echo of the bullet ringing through the emptiness of Route 66. He didn't wait for a second shot. Sliding out from the back seat, James bolted toward the truck cab like a cornered animal. Only 2 words echoed in his mind. Get out. His boots clanked loudly against the step into the cab, so loud it startled even him. He jumped into the seat, slammed the gas pedal, his hands trembling as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine started slower than usual, too slow. "Come on, please come on," James mumbled, praying to no one in particular. The engine roared to life. He shifted into gear when, bang! The second bullet flew past his left side mirror, shattering it into sparkling shards that sprayed across the windshield like glass rain. He floored it. The truck screamed like a beast awakened, surging forward. In the remaining mirror, James caught a glimpse of a tall man, heavily bearded, wearing faded mechanic's overalls, standing motionless in the middle of the road, holding an old hunting rifle, not chasing, not dodging, just standing there, watching, until, bang, the third shot. The bullet slammed into the front of the truck, right beneath where James was seated. It left a deep dent, like a ripe apple punched in, only inches from his chest. James let out a strangled scream, ducking against the wheel, pressing himself down into the seat as if curling up could shield him from bullets. Behind him, an engine growled to life. A sound old and heavy, the Cadillac. He was being chased. That night, Route 66 was no longer just a road. It had become an arena. The old silver Cadillac surged from behind, headlights off, like a massive steel ghost. James could barely see anything but his own dim red taillights and the faint white glow of his shaking GPS screen. The mechanic was closing in on the left. James could see the shadowy figure behind the scratched windshield, rifle raised again, this time aiming directly at the truck's front glass. James swerved hard. The truck's tires screeched against the pavement, a deafening roar. The Cadillac veered off course, slipping to the right, nearly sliding into a ditch. But he didn't give up. 10 minutes, then 15. Then there were 20 minutes of pursuit. James had never imagined an old Cadillac could tail a semi-truck that long on a straight highway. Just as he'd never imagined a complete stranger could calmly pull the trigger 3 times at someone they'd never met, without any clear reason. No threats, no yelling, no robbery, no motive, just shooting and chasing. In the final stretch, when James felt his vision blur from sheer tension, up ahead, flashing lights, blue, red, blue, red. James shouted inside his chest, "Police! It's the police!" The Cadillac must have realized it too. Suddenly, it skidded sideways across the road, veered off at a sharp angle, and turned down a dirt trail leading into the desert, where the darkness was so dense not even headlights could cut through it. James slammed the brakes near the shoulder, gasping like someone who just escaped a fall off a cliff. James's truck came to a crooked stop on the roadside, its engine still growling like it was panicking. Police lights flashed ahead, 2 patrol cars, one officer stepping out with a cautious hand resting on his holster, his face filled with suspicion. James climbed down, head spinning, hands still shaking. He didn't even know what he said first. He only remembered that when the officer asked, his voice didn't even sound like his own. He was driving a silver Cadillac, old, heavy beard, mechanic's outfit, shot at me 3 times, chased me for 20 minutes. The officer went quiet, then glanced at his partner, whispered something James couldn't catch. Finally, they just nodded. "We'll send a team to check the dirt road. He might have turned into an abandoned property. There are lots of side trails in this stretch." James wanted to scream, "No! He's not a fugitive. He's someone waiting for people like me to drive by." But instead, he just nodded. At that moment, James understood that no one was ever going to find that Cadillac. No one was going to find that mechanic. The police let James go after a brief statement. No one called back, no report, no investigation. That night, James parked at a rest stop less than 80 miles from Santa Monica. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just sat in silence inside the cab, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner, checking the rearview mirror every 5 minutes. He never drove at night again, not because he feared the dark, but because he knew. Some things in the dark knows exactly who you are. And if you ever find yourself driving along Route 66 at 3 a.m., he might be waiting for you next. Alan, a newly minted truck driver, was struggling through an overnight delivery from New Jersey to Indiana. He'd been driving for over 10 hours, his eyes burning, his brain feeling like someone had stirred batter in it. The only thing keeping him awake was a can of Red Bull, and it was now completely empty. When the GPS indicated a nearby rest stop, Alan didn't hesitate. He turned down a narrow side road, leading to an abandoned gas station where a yellowish light flickered weakly behind a dust-coated window. No other vehicles, no voices, only the wind and the distinct sensation that the ground was listening to every step he took. He stepped inside. No doorbell, no staff, no sound from an AC unit. Everything was drowned in a silence thick as old engine oil. At the far end of the hallway, a faint light spilled from a back room. Curiosity, mixed with exhaustion, led Alan forward. He pushed the door open. Inside was a plugged-in refrigerator, still running but completely empty, no shelves inside, as if someone had taken everything out to do something else. As he quietly closed the door, clang! The sound of metal dropping echoed from the front counter. Alan froze. He heard it clearly. But when he stepped back out, no one. He turned to the glass entrance. It was wide open. Cold wind blew through. And for a fleeting moment, Alan felt he wasn't the only one who had walked into this place, and certainly not the only one leaving it. Alan had never driven in complete silence. Even on midnight runs through snowy mountain passes or pre-dawn hauls across Kentucky, there was always some kind of sound: the radio, the engine, the wind clawing at the trailer. But now, on a highway that stretched endlessly, the only sound was the tires scraping the road, steady and numb, like a hospital clock ticking in a dying man's room. He was exhausted but not sleepy anymore. Every fiber of his body was tight, like Christmas lights plugged into the wrong outlet. When he'd left the gas station, Alan had looked back one last time. The glass door was still slightly ajar, and that yellow light inside hadn't gone out. It seemed to watch him, casting its shadow long down the road. He cursed under his breath and pressed the pedal a little harder, trying to calm himself with music. The radio flickered on, only static. He twisted the dial repeatedly. Not a single frequency came through. Just a strange sound like breathing, sometimes close, sometimes distant, and a few faint scratching noises like fingernails scraping aluminum. Then the curtain behind his cab shifted. Alan stiffened. It wasn't a jolt from a pothole. It moved gently, rhythmically, like a hand had just pulled it back and let it fall again. He glanced up at the rearview mirror. The curtain still hung in place, but it bulged slightly at the back, as if something inside was breathing. He turned off the radio. The air seemed to freeze. The curtain stopped moving. Alan slowly reached for the glove compartment, pulled out his folding knife. The blade snapped open with a click, so sharp and sudden that it startled even him. But he didn't turn around, didn't check. He just placed it on his lap, light as air, but cold as a silent survival vow. He grabbed his phone, fingers trembling as he typed. Nearest police station, 23 minutes away, 3 turns. He began counting every sign, every mile marker, as if each one was a whispered prayer. Then the curtain moved again. This time, like someone inside was sitting up. Alan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his neck instinctively tucking in. He didn't breathe, didn't dare look, just drove, straight, without stopping. The night was just as dark as it had been, but the wind was colder, and the air at the back of his neck heavier. And for the entire ride to the station, Alan never once looked back. But he knew. In a vague yet certain way, he knew. Something had entered his truck back at that gas station, and it had no intention of leaving. Alan parked right in front of the police station, a small gray brick building with dim lights, just like every rural precinct he'd ever driven past. Quiet to the point of being unnaturally quiet. He didn't turn off the engine, just flung open the door and jumped out like a man who had just escaped hell. His heart was pounding against his ribs like it might burst. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely grip the glass door handle. Inside, a desk officer looked up and frowned. "You okay?" he asked, voice flat, not bothering to hide his suspicion. Alan gasped. Someone's in my truck. I think they're hiding in the sleeper cab." "You mean like a thief?" "No, I don't know. They haven't done anything, but they're in there. Since the last stop, the curtain, it moved. I didn't open it. I haven't seen them, but I know they're there." The officer stared at Alan for a few more seconds, then stood up and called another officer over on his radio. "Go check the truck," he said. 2 officers followed Alan outside. One kept a hand near his weapon. The other held a flashlight, scanning the truck like they were searching a corpse. The cab door opened. Alan couldn't look. He stood back, heart pounding in his ears. Then, a voice called out, "Found them." One of the officers stuck his head out from the sleeper, his face grim. 3 people, 1 woman, 2 men, hiding beneath the sleeper floor. One of them has a knife. All 3 stared at me like I was the intruder. Alan felt the blood drain from his face. They didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't scream, just stared, like they'd been there for a long time. The police pulled them out, one by one. They weren't in uniforms, they had no bags, no ID. A barefoot woman with tangled hair, a man in a soaked hoodie, like he'd just crawled out of the ground, and the last one, holding 2 rusty folding knives, his eyes hollow like a dried-up well. None of them answered when asked for names. There were no missing person reports matching them. Only one sentence was spoken by the man with the knives as he looked at Alan with bloodshot eyes. "The road's long and cold. We just needed a ride." The police kept Alan for nearly an hour to write a report, ask questions, and inspect the truck one more time. But despite all their professionalism, despite all the paperwork, there were gaps, blank spaces they couldn't fill. None of the 3 people in custody revealed their identities. They had no injuries, showed no signs of hunger or thirst, and didn't react to any questions. They just stayed silent, as if they were waiting for something to happen, something that didn't belong to this world. When Alan asked if they were criminals, one of the officers only shrugged. Hard to say. No signs of forced entry, could be homeless, or lost, or... He left the sentence hanging, his eyes drifting toward Alan's truck parked in the lot, like he didn't want to know anything more. Eventually, they let Alan go. He returned to his cab, climbing into the driver's seat like stepping into the living room of a house that had just been haunted. Everything looked normal. The curtain was still closed, the sleeper empty, his bag in its usual spot. But something was off. A small folded piece of paper lay on the pillow in the back. He didn't remember leaving anything there. His hand picked it up and opened it. "Thanks for the ride. Sometimes we don't find the way out, but we don't need to." No signature. The handwriting was crooked, like it had been written with the left hand, or by someone who'd never learned to write at all. Alan looked into the rearview mirror. The night wasn't over. The yellow highway lights passed by like drifting ghosts. He folded the note, slid it into his shirt pocket, and started the engine. For the rest of the drive, he didn't turn on the radio, didn't dare look too long into the mirror. And that night, when he pulled into a quiet rest stop about 50 miles from Indiana, Alan locked the doors, shut the curtains tight. But before falling asleep, he glanced over his shoulder one last time, and the pillow had a small indentation, as if someone had just been sitting there moments ago. Some don't knock. They don't walk in. They slip through. In the cracks between exhaustion and inattention. And sometimes, when you think you just need a short rest to make it through the night, they'll rest with you. Vincent had been driving for nearly 10 hours. He couldn't remember the last time he'd taken a break. The forest road ahead stretched endlessly, thick and black as melted asphalt. No gas stations, no lights, no signs. Just trees, and a darkness so heavy you could hear it. His eyelids started to droop, and just then, his headlights lit up something lying in the middle of the road. A child's purple dress. Vincent slammed on the brakes. The truck slowed with a soft screech of the tires. He looked closer. It wasn't just the dress. A few feet away were a pair of small blue shoes, then a red sweater with bear-shaped buttons, and a pair of striped shorts. Everything was scattered, like someone had peeled away the layers of a child's body, and disappeared. He turned off the engine and stepped out. No blood, no signs of an accident. The breeze blew lightly, colder than usual. Not nighttime cold, purposeful cold. Vincent bent down to pick up the dress. The fabric was damp and cold, like human skin left out in the fog. He looked around, ears straining to catch any sound. No cars, no voices, only the wind weaving through the forest, and for a second, he thought he heard breathing. A chill ran down his spine. What crept into him wasn't fear, it was the gut-deep sense that this shouldn't be here. And if someone had left it behind, they didn't want to be found. Vincent stood still, the headlights flickering across the forest's edge. And though he didn't know why, he knew one thing for sure. Tonight, something had begun. Vincent stood frozen on the road, the cold child's dress hanging from his hand, his mind teetering between exhaustion and an unnamed dread. He'd seen crashes before. He'd witnessed brutal wrecks. But what lay in front of him now, those eerily clean clothes scattered across the pavement, this wasn't random. It was arranged, deliberate. He tossed the dress back onto the ground and stepped toward the edge of the forest, where his headlights barely pierced through the first few rows of trees. The air there was thicker, colder, like the trees were hiding something inside them. And then, crack, a soft snap, like a dry twig being stepped on. Vincent whipped around, eyes scanning the dark silhouettes of trees. He held his breath, his ears sharpened. Silence. Then, a scream, short, high-pitched, sharp enough to slice his eardrums. A child's voice. Vincent flinched. He spun to face the woods, his hands curling as if gripping an invisible steering wheel. "Is someone there?" His voice barely made it out, dissolving into a sea of rustling leaves. No answer. Then, another scream. Identical, but from the opposite direction. Vincent felt his throat dry up. A part of him wanted to run into the woods to find the child, but another part, the part that had survived 2 decades on the road, screamed, "No, something's wrong." He stepped back, eyes locked on the tree line. No movement, no bugs, no breeze, only darkness. And a voice, human-like, but not human. Vincent turned toward his truck, his legs heavy as stone. He reached for the door when... thud. Something hit the truck door. He jumped back, heart seizing in his chest. The headlights caught the shape of a tall, thin man in a baseball cap, standing motionless across the road. He shouted something, a garbled, broken sound, like it didn't come from a human throat. Then he threw something again, this time a metal object. Bang! It struck the passenger window, leaving a spiderweb crack right at Vincent's eye level. Vincent stared at him for several seconds. The man didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there, as if waiting for him to step out of the light. Vincent stood frozen next to the truck, one hand still on the door handle, heart pounding like it was about to explode from his chest. The crack in the window reflected his face like a broken mirror, distorted, twitching, uncertain whether it was him staring back or something else mimicking him from the other side. The stranger remained there, unmoving. He tilted his head in an unnatural way, as if assessing Vincent or waiting for a signal. The dim headlights began to spill light across the edge of the trees. Vincent, drawn by an invisible force, turned back to the forest for one final look. And in that very moment, he saw them. Figures. 3, maybe 4, standing deep within the forest, behind the trunks, not hiding, not moving, just standing there. One of them raised something. Vincent squinted. An old loudspeaker. He recognized that kind. It was the type used for camping, capable of playing pre-recorded sounds. Then, the scream rang out again. From that speaker, he heard the faint static behind the sound, something you only notice with tape recordings or cheap devices. This time, Vincent wasn't afraid in the usual way. He felt chilled to the core, not because the scream sounded real, but because it was designed to sound perfect, in a way only a fake could. They didn't need him to believe there was a child in the forest. They only needed him to doubt, to go check. Vincent slowly backed toward the truck door. The figures in the woods didn't move. The man across the road didn't advance. He threw open the cab door, climbed in, and locked it instantly. His hands trembled as he slid the key in. The dashboard lights flickered. The engine groaned, like the weary roar of an old beast, but it was still alive. As the truck reversed away from the scene, Vincent glanced into the rearview mirror. No one followed. They didn't need to. They already knew where he was going. And on another night, if someone else were to drive this route, Vincent was certain they'd still be there, behind the woods, behind the pile of children's clothes, behind the screams, waiting. Vincent drove for a full hour without stopping, his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind still being pulled back to the forest and those perfect screams. He couldn't remember how many turns he'd taken or how many mile markers he'd passed. But when the lights of a rest stop finally appeared in the distance, his heartbeat began to return to something close to normal. The truck came to a stop. Vincent didn't leave the cab. He wasn't hungry, wasn't thirsty, just drained. But as he reached for the curtain, preparing to get some sleep, he suddenly froze. On the passenger seat, where he was sure there had been nothing, now sat a small purple knit cap. He didn't remember bringing it into the truck, didn't remember picking it up while standing outside in the woods. He didn't touch it, just stared. His eyes locked on that cap for several long minutes before he finally reached for his phone and called the police. He told the whole story, his voice hoarse, broken, like someone speaking through the haze of a fever. The officer on duty said simply, "We've had a few similar calls over the years. No evidence, no missing persons, no one was hurt. But there are patterns, and they usually happen at night." Near Forest Sector, 219, Vincent hung up. The next morning, he made his delivery, on time. No one noticed anything strange. No one asked why he looked like someone who'd just woken from a dream caught between two worlds. From that day on, Vincent avoided his old route. He never turned down roads that led through thick forest, and he never stopped his truck if he saw children's clothing scattered across the pavement. Once, during a dinner with other drivers, someone mentioned an old buddy who saw a tiny shoe lying in the middle of the highway at 3 a.m. Vincent just gave a faint smile. He said nothing. Because some stories, if you tell them, people will think you're losing your mind. But if you keep quiet, you might sleep better, at least until the next night. And if one night, you're driving through the dark, exhausted to the point of pulling over, and your headlights catch a small red sweater with bear-shaped buttons lying ahead, just keep driving. Don't stop. Don't get out. Because sometimes, the call isn't asking you to save anyone. It just wants you to come closer. You've just heard 3 stories. No one died. No one went missing. But no one was quite the same after that trip either. And you know what? The scariest part, it isn't what they saw. It's the feeling that it might happen again. If you're watching this at night, check your windows. Glance at your rearview mirror and ask yourself, will your next trip really be alone? If you want to hear more spine-chilling stories like these, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and comment with the scariest story you've ever heard. Because who knows, your story might be the one that keeps someone else awake tonight. See you again on another night. When the screen lights up again and the darkness begins to tell its story.